And I welcome everyone to Press TV's News Review program, where we get in-depth in one of the day's top stories. The U.S. House of Representatives has approved a $45 billion aid package for Ukraine. Military and economic assistance is part of a $1.6 trillion government funding bill that has passed the Senate. It will now go to U.S. President Joe Biden to be signed into law. The U.S. has been Ukraine's main military sponsor in its war with Russia. It's already sent aid worth around $50 billion to Ukraine this year. Russia has repeatedly warned that foreign military aid for Ukraine will only drag out the war and escalate human suffering. War in Ukraine has plunged Moscow-Washington ties to their lowest point in decades. Russia's ambassador to the U.S. has compared the state of relations, that is, to the Ice Age, warning of a high risk of a clash. Joining us now for the program is David Yaghouban, professor of history at Cal State University, San Bernardino, California, and Matthew Ehret, political analyst, joining us from Montreal. Gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you both to the program here. David, we're going to start with you. Hope you're safe and doing well out there in Cali. David, your thoughts? $40–50 billion. The aid's going to obviously keep rolling in. We heard Biden a couple days ago, or was it yesterday or the day before, when Zelensky visited him at the White House. Say, we're going to stick with you guys for as long as it takes. The Patriot missile batteries, all this good stuff. How far is it going to go to help Ukraine win this thing?
Great to be with you, Daniel. Unfortunately, this is just going to further prolong the suffering of the Ukrainian people and just extend this proxy war that Ukraine has no chance of winning ultimately. And in terms of where the priorities of American political elites are, this is going to bring the total American remittances to Ukraine for this war in 2022 to over $100 billion. By most estimates, it would cost about $20 billion to solve homelessness in America on an annual basis. So the American government is basically giving Ukraine 5 times as much as it would cost to solve homelessness in the United States, to simply prolong its proxy war against Russia, to prolong the suffering of the Ukrainian people, and by all accounts to assure the destruction of Western European economies and the flow of weapons as well as refugees back into Western Europe. So unfortunately, this $45 billion, and I must say the Biden administration only asked for $37 billion. Congress decided, well, let's just pony up another $8 billion. $8 billion more on top of the $31 trillion that the United States is in debt isn't much to them, but for the average American who is suffering as a result of inflation, who can see on a daily basis their fellow citizens sleeping under plastic and under bridges and under benches and bus stops, this is just unconscionable.
Thank you, David. And Matthew Ehret, welcome to the program there from Montreal. Now, Matthew, so if David's saying, Professor Yaghouban there is saying, he's telling us, okay, no matter how much money or resources, obviously, they're going to give the Ukrainians, there's not going to be a serious chance they're going to win this thing. So then, Matthew, what is the point?
Well, from the standpoint of grand strategy, there are 3 primary power blocks that the United States, and I would say the Anglo-American alliance as a whole, is desperate to try to break, which is the European zone, Russia, and China. To keep them as much as possible in a state of disequilibrium, since the idea at this moment in history of a collapsing Western-dominated system and the rise of a new alternative economic security architecture, which is now arising, is a serious mortal threat. So I think that Ukraine is serving as a bit of a proxy, a destabilizing influence. As it stands right now, it is absorbing, as Blinken has admitted recently, he recently said that had the Afghan debacle not ended, then the United States would not be in a position to do what they're doing with Ukraine right now. So it is creating a lot of graft. It is greasing a lot of palms. A lot of this money is going towards defense contractors and NGOs who are very closely tied to figures within Washington who are voting up these absurd bills. As the previous speaker pointed out, the population within the United States is completely has a very different set of priorities. People are more concerned about their economy, the fact that they don't have a sense of a future, the inflation. Ukraine doesn't rank very high at all amongst the priorities of most Americans, which only denotes the detachment of the elected representatives in Washington right now who have no sense of the reality on the ground of those who are they're expected to represent.
Thank you, Matthew. And David, Biden also said that we're going to continue. Obviously, I mentioned this earlier, but to basically back you guys as long as it takes, speaking to Zelensky, meaning Kiev. And he also said because there is something much bigger at play here, something much bigger at stake. What's at stake? NATO's so-called right to basically indefinitely expand wherever it wants to go. Does the U.S. eminent domain, psyche apply here?
It certainly does, and related to what Matthew Ehret very eloquently just stated, I believe this has everything to do with the maintenance of American full-spectrum dominance. That is the Wolfowitz Doctrine, the control of all known realms in which humans exist. That is space, that is on land, below the land, on the sea, below the sea, etc. Basically, universal hegemony, and that is still the primary framework for American quote-unquote national security. And so again, to Matthew Everett's point, the United States is interested in pursuing this proxy war against Ukraine to, as Lloyd Austin said, to weaken Russia. After ostensibly weakening and dividing up Russia, it can focus its attention on somehow supposedly containing or curtailing Chinese growth. It's absurd. It's just yet another imperial pipe dream. This is neoconservative wish casting to the tune of this year alone over $110 billion for a losing proxy war in Ukraine. So it is simply, again, going to prolong the agony and suffering of the Ukrainian people, of Western Europeans, and as well, ultimately, the American citizen.
Thank you, David. And Matthew, I'm glad that David mentioned proxy war a couple times there, because that's the whole point here, isn't it? That the Russians feel there's a very good chance this is going to come out from underneath the penumbra of a proxy war and turn into direct confrontation either between the Russians and Americans or Russians and NATO. There isn't much difference there. Your final thoughts, please.
Well, that is certainly the maximum danger right now, is that this could escalate. I believe that those who are trying to manipulate this proxy war are using the game plan that they had put forth in the 1980s in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union, and they're just sort of trying to do the exact same thing over again, not realizing that the world has shifted dramatically since 1981, 82, 83, and we're now in a very different ball game. Back then, the U.S. economy was not about to collapse. We didn't have a Russia-China alliance that is increasingly involving Iran and many other nations around the Belt and Road Initiative. We didn't have any of that back in the 80s. Today, it's a very different world. So I think the danger now is that the idiots in the West are doubling down, tripling down, and don't have any ability to self-criticize. And this does increase the danger of an actual hot war. Discussion of the utilization of nuclear warheads, even against targets that don't involve that don't have a nuclear weapon or aren't going to use one, is a U.S. foreign policy doctrine under Biden. That is a huge threat, and I think that at this point we need to see some patriots with a little bit of reason still available to them to take a stand right now in the U.S. before this goes past the point of no return.
And I want to get that to you. I was going to actually wrap it up, David, but I really want you to weigh in on that. If this thing gets that out of hand, where you got Belarus and possibly the Russians on one side, you got NATO on the other side, Russia knows for the most part, for it to stay in the fight at that point, it's probably going to have to dip into its nuclear arsenal. Do you see this, the U.S. and NATO willing to take this thing that far, to risk direct confrontation? Because it doesn't seem like they're letting down. They're doubling down on arms sales and the sophistication on what kind of weapons they're giving the Ukrainians.
Well, Vladimir Putin has made it very clear, and I'm paraphrasing, but that a world without Russia is not a world that would be worth living in. And so it's very clear, based on his statements, based on Russia's nuclear security strategy, that basically it will be mutually assured destruction should things progress that way. And so the question is, are the sociopathic neoconservatives of the American government willing to see the end of the earth to sustain their interest in maintaining full spectrum dominance, global hegemony, and I guess you could say, at least for 2022, that's a $110 billion question. In terms of the future of the United States of America, I guess it's the $31 trillion and counting dollar question.
All right, good stuff, guys. Stay safe, both of you, and thanks to you both for joining us on the program there. David Yaghouban, professor of history, joining us out of sunny California, and Matthew Ehret, political analyst there, joining us from Montreal. And viewers, this brings us to the end of your Press TV's News Review program. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye for now.